Hey everybody, welcome to this episode of TRCOA's Behind the Groove. If you're here live, please introduce yourself and ask questions in the chat as we go along. This episode is sponsored by Stinson Recording Studios. Also, if you find this content useful, please like this video, and if you are new, please subscribe to our channel. We make new content every week. Today we are proud to have Ben Kliever. He's going to show you modes and functions in Pro Tools. Ben is the owner of Nebula 88 Studios and one of TRCOA's beginning recording techniques instructors. Without further ado, Ben Kliever.
Hey everyone, welcome back to TRCOA's Behind the Groove seminar. I'm Ben Kliever and I will be leading our lesson. We will be continuing the second half of our Pro Tools functions and modes that we started on Tuesday, going over what's everything that we have here in Pro Tools to get us our navigation going around. So let's go ahead and let's dive into where we were. So last episode we talked about all of our shortcuts, our A to Z shortcuts on our number pad, how it's all of our metronome settings, all of our pre and post roll, our record modes, our playback modes, and our big counters, and we talked about our grids, we talked about track modes, we also talked about in mixed mode, mixed view here, all the different options that we have as well for our inserts and everything we can see from this side of the screen. So now from what we're going to pick up with today is we're going to start with the main modes in Pro Tools. I'm sure most of you, for the most part, when you're working in Pro Tools, majority of this stuff that your majority work you're going to be doing is between slip and grid, which makes perfect sense. That is 99% of the time. Hey there, Errol, how you doing, man? Welcome here. So we're looking at the modes over here. So our different, we have 4 different modes. Technically we have 5, and we'll talk about that here in a second on what that what that is. But we're going to start with the most basic ones because just because it's what we're going to be used to seeing. So we have slip mode here. Slip mode is what allows us to move clips or move anything that we're grabbing on here freely around the session. So I can grab this clip and move it wherever I want and it's completely free for me to move it wherever I want to. Now, when we're on grid is what's going to stick us to whatever our grid option is. So right now, I have my grid set to half notes. So all we see out here is half notes. So you see we have 1 measure, 2 measure. Inside the measure, we have 1 line. So that's literally our half note right in the middle. So I can move on the grid at half notes. But whatever you set the grid to is what this is going to stick against. So like now I've used it to quarters. So now we have 1, 2, 3, 4 beats in a line. So now I can actually slide this grid onto any of the lines that's in there. So whenever on grid mode, it's sticking straight to the grid and that's going to determine whatever our lines are up here. Now, like if you turn the grid off, like grid mode's not going to do anything because there's nowhere for you to stick it to. But this is always going to determine, like you see 8ths, it just keeps getting smaller, go down to 16ths. You can get really fine with how much you want your grid, how tight you want your grid to be. I'm going to go back to quarter notes for this, make sure that is there. Now, something that you may not know that's underneath grid mode here is something that is called relative grid. And when you click on it, it turns it purple. So before I go to relative grid mode, I'm going to go back to slip so I can get it off, but let me explain what relative grid is. So relative grid is wherever your clip is relative to one of these grid lines, when you move it, it's going to stay that same distance apart from that grid line, no matter what. It's not actually going to stick to a grid line, it's going to stay the same distance apart from the grid line. So let me show you what I mean by that. So let me zoom in here so we can make this a little bit easier. We're looking at this purple recording right here. And another hotkey that's really useful for this is we can use the tilde right below escape on the left of our keyboard, and I'm always, like my hand's always almost living over here in this area because we're always hitting hotkeys and it's never moving, but this lets us quickly switch between those 4 modes without having to ever click on them. And I'll show you another thing you can do up there here in a minute. But so let me get in slip mode so I can move this off the grid. So let's say you had some weird timing piece and for just whatever reason you had to move this note and it was a little bit off the grid. So like right now we're in between, it's not this way or whatever, you know, it's set exactly how it is. But if we put it on relative grid mode, like so I'm on grid, now I click it in relative grid mode, instead of when I move it to the right, instead of it sticking to this line, it's gonna stay this same distance apart from the next grid line. See, so it's staying that same distance to whatever the grid is. So it's relative to the grid. So if I switch to half notes, it's gonna stay that same distance apart, but now it's gonna jump to the half note. And you see it won't let me move it any closer to the line. So relative grid keeps whatever you had that may be slightly off the grid, but you want to keep it in time and maybe move it to another section in your session. You can use relative grid mode to keep it in that same time alignment without having to realign it. Let me move this back to grid mode. And now that's why you can see grid sticks it to the line, and I can't go anywhere. And so I can't even move with grid mode until I cross the next grid line. So those are those two ones out the gate. Now we're going to talk about our these two ones that are used least often in Pro Tools, but they are very important for exactly what they do. So we're going to talk about spot mode next. So I'm going to actually move this because I know I recorded this right here on line 3, and that's the original recording spot, but I'm going to move this clip over here for a second. So let's say that this clip is here in this spot. We also have clip bins area too. But what this really is this is like our save your butt thing here, because we can use spot mode, and when you click on a clip in spot mode, you can't drag it anywhere, but what it does is it opens up a dialog box right here where we can decide where we want to send this. So if we had any clip in the session, we can be like, cool, I actually want this clip to be at measure 7. Now I press that, press enter, boom, and it moves it straight to measure 7. Or so you can use spot mode to send a clip to anywhere in your session to exactly where you want it. Now the big thing that saves you in this scenario is that if you, let's say you had this this recording and you moved it or something, or you got a session where a clip got moved to somewhere in the session, maybe it's not on the grid and you're like, man, I'm not actually sure where this clip was in my session whenever I was originally using this, when you open it again to mix or edit or do whatever you were doing. So if you don't know where that is and you want it to go back to where it originally was in the session, when you click on it, instead of typing in where the start is, there is a section down here that says original timestamp. And this is where that clip was originally recorded in the session. So if we just hit this arrow to the right of that, it sets it to where it was originally recorded. We press OK, and now it's back to its original spot in the session, which makes it super easy for us. I mean, this is something you can do that way. Or if you completely lost a clip and you didn't know what happened to it, you can come in here and literally, drag a clip out of the clip bin and go in there, and then you can click original timestamp, and then it moves it right to the timestamp. So this is really where spot mode and pulling something out of the clip bin, if you are forced to have to go do that. Like again, I say usually don't try to go in here unless you have to unless you lost something. But other than that, you'll be able to drag those out and put them right in their original timestamp, which is super saver if you've ever had a thing where you can't find or link or like find the audio where it is, or it went missing or got deleted by accident. Now, this last one, shuffle mode, is something you will likely not use in music at all. I actually use it a lot, but that's because I do a good amount of podcasts for people as well outside of doing music work. And this is great for doing podcast or dialogue editing, because shuffle mode, basically when I cut something out of it, like I'm going to do a quick, I will show you because it does a couple of different things. So let me move this grid out here. I'm going to just give us a couple of duplicates of these, because I just want to have, so you can see what shuffle mode does. So there's one thing you may use in music that would make it easy, so like when you grab a clip in shuffle mode, like there has to be a clip before it or after it for it to move. But if I have shuffle mode and I move it to the left at all, it automatically sticks it straight to the next closest clip. It's like same thing here. If my cursor passes that bar, it's going to jump all the way over to here. See how it just automatically moves? So shuffle mode shuffles it either way to the next closest clip, and that's what it's going to stick it to. Now there's another function that this does outside of that that is really big and a big part of what's going on with shuffle mode. So I'm going to do it on this one because even though it's on time, but let's say I'm in shuffle mode here. When you cut something in shuffle mode, it's going to cut this selection out that I have, and then the area next to it is automatically going to be moved to touching that clip. So watch, when I cut this, so if I cut this in slip mode, it just takes the square out. That's what we're used to seeing. But if I go to shuffle mode and cut this out, now it cut it and then it moves that next clip after it. Now, another thing you do want to see on this, just so you know, and this is why I would recommend almost not using it in music and in dialogue, it works great, but you're going to notice too, if I go to shuffle mode, not only does it move when I'm separating the middle of the clip here, like the clip that's touching it, it's going to move anything else in the session on that track that's after it. So you're going to see when I cut this out, not only is it going to move this section and touch it, it's going to move this section back the exact same amount. So watch, I'm going to cut this little piece out and see how it, and then it pulls that back. So in music, usually if you're cutting something out, you want it to be cut out and you don't want the other pieces to move. But that's what shuffle mode does on that front. And it also, if you need to move something really quick, you can move a clip and it'll automatically stick it to that next clip. Now, let's say you're working on music, which I do this sometimes with music because I'm always using the tilde to shift through this, and it's like, okay, I don't even want to hit shuffle mode because I'm never going to use shuffle mode while I'm mixing music. For the most part, I mean, there may be a specific reason, but if you don't want to use shuffle mode at all, so you make sure nothing like that happens. Another thing actually, I want to show you one more thing in shuffle before I show you that. Two, just so you notice, like if you drag the clip back in shuffle mode, it's going to pull the other part with it too. So like as I move stuff, it's continually moving and pulling back the clips as you move anything in shuffle. So that's why some people, hey there, Michaela. Sometimes people don't, they don't want to like that. They don't even want to have the option of that happening while they're working with music because nothing responds the same. So you can hold command and you can click on shuffle up here, and then it puts a lock on there, which now locks shuffle mode. And now when I shift through my grid types, it doesn't ever even go up to shuffle at all. So that way you have no chance of it getting into that mode if you don't want to. And then you just do the same thing. You just command click right back on top of it and it'll turn it back on. I assume if you're on, and this is Mac commands, obviously. I would assume on PC it would be a control, but don't get that confused if you're Mac, because control is something different. So this is our modes up here between slip, grid, relative grid underneath it, slip, so slip, grid, relative grid, spot, and then shuffle. So those are our those are our 4 big modes that you're constantly going to use. Most 99% of the time you're going to be in slip and grid and music, but I wanted you to make sure you know what you're doing when you're looking at these other ones. So now the next thing we're going to look at is we're just going to go directly to the right and go from there. So we're going to talk about zooming as well. So down here we have numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. These are like preset numbers that are on here that's just memory zoom. I believe you can go override these if you actually want to save your own custom ones. But so if you press 1, it's going to make it really, really zoomed out, and then it just zooms in more and more as I go to each of these numbers as I'm looking at the session. So like 5 is super zoomed in, 1's super zoomed out. So that's the difference between those 3. And then what I just did right there, if anyone's ever wondering, you can always use Option and A in this window, and it'll make your whole session fit to the window. So like if I hit Option A here, it's just making everything I have in my session fit to my window, which it also levels out all your clip zoom in too. So if I had like my clips super zoomed in and I was super zoomed in on something, and then I press Option A, it puts them all back at their standard clip view size and locks the whole session to the size of your screen, which is very convenient. Now that we talked about zooming in that way, we're going to talk about zoom because there's quite a few ways to do zoom. Whenever you have the A to Z mode on over here, zoom is with R and T if you didn't know. So it's a very good one that's why I always want to have A to Z on this. Now another thing you want to be careful of though too, just in case this happens to you, because on either side of R and T is the E and the Y. And both E and Y have their own controls that are linked to the AZ. So E anytime that you're on a clip, you press E and it's going to zoom into that clip the size of the entire screen. So when I press E here, some of you may have seen this and you're like, how did this even happen? You probably accidentally hit E and then it zoomed in and it brings the clip that you're selecting to the size of the whole screen, so you're super zoomed in. And to get back out of this, you just tap E again and it just goes back to normal zoom. Now the one that can be tricky if you accidentally hit on the right of T is Y. And what Y does when you have a clip selected is it moves it to the front of the session. So watch, when I press this and I press Y, it automatically dumps it to the very beginning of the session. So if you accidentally do that with a clip in the middle of your session, and you hit Y, it's going to shoot it all the way to the front, and you just want to make sure you undo that so it doesn't, unless that's what you meant to do. So, which if you ever do want to send something straight to the front of the session, or you did something and you wanted it to be there, you just press Y and it goes right to the front. So those are those two zoom fronts as well. So you have RT, then you have super zoom with E, and then you can zoom in with your numbers here. I believe we can also zoom, like manually, if you don't have your hotkeys or any of those, you can manually zoom in with the plus and minus down here. So like this is horizontal zoom, which is R and T, and then you have vertical zoom with the minus, plus and minus over here. We can actually access that, the hotkey for that, to make your tracks wider in Pro Tools. For a single track, it's to hold Control, and then the up and down arrow lets me make a single track however wide or big I want. If I want it to apply to the whole session, I hold Control and Option and just use up or down arrow, and that lets me zoom in to however small or however big I want the session to be, or all the tracks on there. So that's something I'm constantly using all the time, is those two functions. You have R and T for horizontal, and then you have Control up and down to be able to zoom in, or you can hold Option as well with the up and down arrows to do the whole session, which is very nifty for you to be able to zoom in and out and see everything. So those are those zoom fronts. Now we're going to talk about, now we talked about those main zooms, we're going to talk about this next zoom. You can also, they have zoom in so many places on this, it's crazy. So you have like horizontal zoom here as well, up here with these buttons, these arrows. You have zoom this, that's your super zoom in, so they made that big now. That's the same thing as your E right there. You see how that actually lights up with E now? I don't think that used to be attached to that. So now they have your full clip zoom in up here, so that's really nice too. Now the ones that are in between this is our clip zoom. So not clip gain, clip zoom. We talked about clip gain in the clips, groups and clips seminar, so if you want to go into more about everything with clips, go check out that YouTube video. But this button controls how zoomed in we are, or how zoomed out we are on an actual, on actually what the clip looks like. If you want to get it back to normal, like I said, you can press Option A and it'll put it to its actual normal clip zoom size. So you can zoom in on clip zoom from up here. You can also zoom in on the clip zoom from over here as well. That's what this little option is. And now the hotkey, since that's what half of this stuff's about here, is you getting really quick on this. And like I said, if y'all, I would be taking notes if it was me. I took notes on all this stuff, even when I went above and beyond on this, because all these clip things I did is like I just went to like websites and just sat there and like read people telling me what every single thing did and just memorized them. So to zoom in and out on a clip, you can use Option and Command, and then we have our two brackets that are above the that are above return but below delete, and have the two different brackets right next to P. So the left bracket zooms out on the clip and the right bracket zooms in on the clip. And if we want to go back to standard clip size without doing Option A, which puts our bracket to the entire size. Like let's say we were just zooming in to look at this clip, but we didn't want to see the whole, we didn't want to do Option A and go to that front. Like we can zoom in, and then if you do, instead of Option Command in the brackets, you're going to do Control Option Command, press the left bracket, and it puts it right back to normal. So again, your zooms on that are Option Command, brackets, and then if you do Control Option Command and press the left bracket, it puts it back at standard as well. So those are all of our clip zoom options on that front, and just the hotkeys that are happening on that. This other one right here, this is MIDI zoom in, and this is MIDI zoom in as well. So we would have to bring in a MIDI track into this, which is like, so if we opened our MIDI window, which is instead of Command equals, it's Control equals. you'll see that MIDI zoom option over here, and you can just click right on it and it'll zoom in or out on your MIDI information. Like it's only going to show you what you actually have on there. So that's zoomed all the way in on this front and that's zoomed all the way out. But this is controlling MIDI information on there. See, like I don't have any MIDI that's larger than what's happening here. So it doesn't need to zoom in, but that's what that front is. That's what this one is looking at. Let me hide that. Okay, now that we've talked about our zooms and we've talked about our modes, now we're going to talk about all of our actual tools in Pro Tools. So the Pro Tools tools, double tools. So some of this stuff was made in from earlier versions of Pro Tools, and they just kept those in for anyone who's been using Pro Tools for a long time. So this first one here is a zoom button that's pretty redundant with how many zooms that we have now, especially with all the hotkeys and everything I just showed you. This does the same thing. Like, I mean, it just zooms in as you click, it zooms in, and that's it. So before, that's the only way you used to be able to zoom in Pro Tools, unfortunately. Glad they really updated this and made this more digital. And another thing, just so you know what's under there, there was single zoom, which single zoom is what they used to use all the time back then from what I can tell, because when you click on it once, it automatically jumps to the next tool. So you zoom in once and then it jumps to whatever the tool you were just last using, and that's what it goes to. So anything in Pro Tools that you see has a little down arrow under it, we're gonna get into them, means there's more tools underneath it than just what's on top. So that's our zoom function. The next thing over here we have is most of you are used to using what you see is the multi-tool here. And just so you know, the hotkey for me to switch between all these different tools is the escape button in Pro Tools. So if escape does something else on your computer, aka like on a Mac, it'll probably try to like close it or open something else. I mean, literally, if you want all these hotkeys to work on your computer, you need to go into like your system preferences up here and like go into your keyboard. And then you actually go in and like turn off, like, yeah, see how every shortcut in Mission Control is turned off? Like literally turn off every button that's with arrows or numbers and shifts and all that stuff, because your Mac's gonna try to override that to use it as whatever the Mac's doing. But if you're using Pro Tools, you wanna uncheck all these things and shortcuts so that it's not trying to do some other function in Mac if you want Pro Tools to function completely how you want it. So just for what it's worth, I think it's worth it in Pro Tools because it makes it so much faster to move around in. But so that's what makes it really easy too to switch between all your tools and modes, is right below it. You got your tilde to switch between your modes, and then you got your escape key to switch between your tools. And I can do all that while I'm still working over here and constantly changing how I'm and constantly changing what tool I'm using, which makes your workflow much, much faster. So inside the multi-tool, we're going to look at the individual things that are involved in. So the first thing is going to be is just like the trim function, which allows us to actually move, like trim a clip. And then from there, there are several different ones that's underneath this standard trim function. So we're going to dive into that. We're going to come back to that after we just talk about the multi-tool. So the next, because this is the main things that are in the multi-tool, is your trim, which all these used to be individual. Then you have the cursor, which lets you grab a certain section, which sometimes it's good to select the cursor if you have a bunch of edit points, because especially like when I'm doing dialogue stuff sometimes, because you'll try to go into a section right here and try to grab something, and the second you get close to the edge, it turns to a bracket when maybe you needed to zoom in somewhere in there, and that's brackets acting like that. So if you're on the cursor, all it's ever going to do is let you just highlight things. And so that's what's good about the cursor. There's no other tool underneath the cursor, it's just a cursor. And then over here is what allows us to grab. Then separation used to let you, like when you used to be able to separate. I mean, we have hotkeys that let us separate so much faster now without ever having to do that. Object is kind of cool because you can grab multiple things without it grabbing everything. It's like, see, I can hold shift, and if I don't have object on and I try to do that, I go to time and I grab this and hold shift down, it's gonna grab that whole section, you see? So like, object just grabs very specific things if you ever just want to grab one clip and not grab another clip that's in there. So it's very, very controlled if you're on object view. So those are those tools, and then when you click the very next thing and it lights them all up, that's what makes the multi-tool. And the multi-tool is you have the cursor on the top half of your line. Like you see, you have this break line on every track that you have here on these clips. So when you're on the top half of it, it turns to a cursor. When you're on the bottom half of it, it's the grabber. And when you get close to the edges, it's a trim tool. And that's why they made the multi-tool the way it is. So it makes it very easy for you to be able to do all those things really quickly. But if you need a specific one, you can either click on them or just use escape to get to it. Next over here, just so we can see that, then we're going to dive into this, and our drawing tool is just the scrubber. All it is that it lets you hear audio as you scrub over it. As I click and hold down, it lets me just hear the audio or reverse it. So that's what the scrub tool does. Just wanted y'all to know that's there. Now let's talk about the modes that are underneath our trim tool. So trim is our standard tool that we're very used to seeing. We have a, let me grab this thing out again. Let's get rid of this guy up. See, this is why you can't grab without your multi-tool, which makes it kind of annoying, right? So let me make this small. So we're gonna do a little thing here. So let's start with this TCE. So what TCE stands for is time, compression, and expansion. So what this does is it allows us to actually stretch a clip. So I'm going to take this clip and I'm going to stretch it out over here. So this is our standard clip here. So there's our clip we have right now. So now, if I stretch this one way or another, it's going to speed up or slow up that clip. So if I drag this out to here, now that clip is stretched and it is half speed of what it just was, because it was one measure and now I dragged it out to 2 measures. Which you can see it's literally stretching the audio. So now, like, let's say if you want to do it the other way and you want to do something that's like half, like double time. So like, but you can stretch this to like any specific spot that you needed to if there was a reason that you wanted to use time compression and expansion. It's just kind of a cool tool that lets you be able to, change the timing of a. And so, but just be careful when you're on that. You actually have to go click that if you want to do time compression and expansion. Now let's take a look at scrub, which the scrub version of trim, it just lets you, whenever you're actually dragging a part out, you hear what you're dragging out. So I want to get it on grid so I can just. But you see how it, no matter what you hear, it's listening to what's going on when you're in the scrub mode with it. Okay, now lastly, we're going to talk about loop mode down here. I'm actually going to make this, let me pull out of this section where it does something that's a little bit different so we can really hear it. So loop mode, let's say you wanted to have a section, like I have a clip that you have in your session and you want it to loop. And there's ways that you can do this where you can just press Command D and you can just duplicate it a bunch of times, but then we got to go in and crossfade every single one of those things anytime you duplicate that. But if you have a clip, what you can do to make it really easy, and it does all this process for you automatically however long you need, is you can go to loop mode down here. And so now what I can do is I can drag this out multiple times, and now it's going to loop what's happening there. So it lets us just continually loop that over, like whatever our thing is, over and over again, and you don't have to do any crossfades or anything. It's all nice and clean for you automatically, and that's what's cool about doing loop mode if you ever need to do that. So that's that mode there. Lastly, we're going to talk about our drawing tool over here. Okay, so drawing tool. We can use this in in any section that allows us to draw. So whether it's velocities in your MIDI mode or actually drawing in MIDI mode, that's where that works. Or if you're in your automation section and we want to actually draw what's happening there, you can take a pencil and literally draw what's happening, and then it'll do automation. And that lets us draw in. Now you see we do have the drop down arrow here. And so we do have some different presets that are down here. The only ones that don't work with the automation things here are the parabolic and the S-curve. But if we pick line, this just gives you like literally perfectly straight lines from grid to grid. Like it's gonna give you a super straight line. You can just draw it. It's gonna constantly do, you know, like if whatever lines you want, it'll draw lines for. So line mode's cool because it's just gonna give you straight lines. The one below that, now these really kind of get crazy. If you wanted, this would be more of like some kind of effect most likely, but you're gonna see like as I go out, I'm gonna make it a little bit, I'm gonna give us a little more spaces here because this is automatically gonna attach to each line, but as I go out, I turn and you see how it's starting to draw triangles because I picked triangles, so. So it lets it do kind of every beat kind of thing. Then we have another one, which is the squares, which is very extreme when you're drawing in squares because there's no gradual fade. It's just jumping from one to the next. Now lastly, this would probably be more something if you're trying to do something with just crazy movement that's very random, but you'll see like this just draws like completely random spots on there every time I move it. It's just making a completely different random setup. And so that's more for good for like just generating random curves for maybe an oscillator or something that's inside some sort of instrument on that front. But that's the drawing section on there. So that is all of our all of our tools that we have up here. Now we have some more control buttons that are underneath this that are very nifty to help you navigate around Pro Tools, which the first one here is tab to transient. So whenever this is on, it jumps straight to the next transient. So let me zoom into something that's that has a huge transient. So a transient is the front of this clip. Like it's anything that's like a sharp peak that's going on here. So if I have tab to transient on, when I press tab from here, it's going to, I'm going to zoom in a little more, it's going to jump to the next closest clip, to the next transient. So now if I hit it again, it's going to jump to that transient, hit it again, jumps to that transient. So it's jumping to the individual transients inside your clip. Now if tab to transient is off, when I press tab, first it's going to jump to the end of this clip. Then if I press tab again, it's going to jump to the next clip over here. And then if I test it again, you know, it's jumping to the end of that clip. If you do shift and tab, I believe, nope, that grabs everything as shift and tab, so my bad. And then if you do option tab, it's gonna go backwards, my bad. So option tab, you see, will jump to and that's the same thing with clip mode as well. Like if I was in, if I have tab to transient on, and I press tab to go forward, it goes to it. If I want to go back to the one before that, you hold option and press tab, and then it jumps to the one behind it. So tab goes forward, option tab goes backwards. So that is our tab to transient function. If I'm looking to go to transients, I have that on. If I'm looking to jump clip to clip, I have that off. So just depending on what you're working on, that's why you'll have that on. Now these next two modes, these next two buttons are things I always have on. Like I always have them on because it's annoying when they don't work the way that they do. So the first one here is link timeline and edit selection. So what that does is anytime that I click, let me turn the other one off here first for a second. So anytime that I click here and go across, so timeline and edit selection means when I'm moving across here, you see anywhere I click, my cursor moves with me. And this may have happened to some of you, like if this is off, when I click here, and when I click next, the cursor stays where it's at, and you're like, why do I have this orange thing? So it's like you always have the cursor where it's gonna start, but you can actually, you know, click and move things that are, and grab other stuff if you didn't want your cursor to move. So that's what link timeline and edit selection is. So anything you have selected with that on is going to make your cursor be there. So like I was saying, if you want to keep the cursor somewhere and then go grab something else and move it, that's when you would turn that off. So now the next mode here is link timeline, link track and edit selection, my bad. So I just said it wrong, but so what track is this allows you to actually, whenever you click on a track, you see that it actually selects the track. If you have that off, when I go click into the next track, it's not moving. You see how it's not moving with that track? it's staying selected on what it is. So usually we want to have both these on so that whenever we click, our cursor is moving there, and whatever track we click, it's selected there. But if you need your own controls of it, if you need to do something off of those, that's what both of these are. So link timeline and then link track to edit selection. So now the next one here is our insertion follows playback, which this is probably something a lot of you have hit while you're in your sessions and you're like, why is my cursor acting this way? It's because the hotkey to turn this thing on is N, which just happens to be right above your space bar. So it's something to really easily hit. So what happens with this when you normally play in Pro Tools mode, like we're just at bar 7 right here. I press play, it goes, I press stop, and it just comes right back to where that cursor is. Now, if this is on, when insertion follows playback, if I press play, when I stop it, the cursor moves to where I stopped it. So no matter what I do, when I play and press stop, it's gonna move to that next spot. So that's with N, and that's something that definitely can happen if you're not used to what that button does. So just be aware that that's what's happening with that section. So, excuse me, that's insertion follows playback. Next here is automation follows edit, which is something you almost always want to have on as well. Let me show you what it does. So it's really easy to see. So like when you grab here when that's on, and I opened up an automation lane so you can see it. When I grab a clip, it grabs the automation lane as well. If I unclick this, now it's no longer affecting like what's going on in automation. So like if I have, let's say I had some automation right here in this clip, with that on, when I do a copy, the automation moves with it. If I have that off and I do a copy and you don't want the automation to move with it, you just drag the clip and the automation doesn't move with the clip. So that's what this automation follows edit is here. So if you want the automation to stay with it, make sure that's on. And if you want to draw automation, you definitely want that on. So just basically if you don't want automation to be happening or moving with what you're doing, like automation will still happen in the session, but it won't be linked to any of your movements that you do. So now up here, we talked about this pretty extensively in the MIDI seminar I did last week. So y'all can go back to the MIDI one, but this is mirrored MIDI editing. And basically what that is, just remember that's if you have two groups that are exactly the same, like if I copied this right here and they're both 1-3, and so this is the exact same thing as this. If I have mirrored MIDI editing on, anything I draw in this one draws in the duplicate version as well. So that's mirrored MIDI editing. If it's off, a duplicate doesn't draw what it did before. So it's pretty straightforward on that front. This thing here is layered editing. So this is an interesting thing. So I'll show you how this works. So it allows you to layer clips on top of each other without it replacing the clip. So normally in Pro Tools, if you grab another clip and I drop it over this and I pull it away, it's gonna take out that section of the clip. Watch. So I grab this clip, drop it right here. Now if I decide I want to take it back out, move it out, oh man, everything was there is gone now. Let's say that we didn't want that to happen. If you turn layered editing on, I can drag this over the top of this to like line up or match with something else, and then I can still drag it out and nothing happened to that clip. Now, my view, I happen to set this on transparency. If you don't have this on transparency, you'll see right here. So if I turn off transparency, like I can't see underneath the, it's not letting me see what's on the clip that I'm looking at. It's just putting it there automatically. But then if I put transparency on, you can see through the clip. Like I can see what's going on through it and on the clip I have. So transparency, if you're going to be using that, transparency is something you probably should just have on all the way, because it's never going to make it like difficult for anything you're doing on that front. But that's what layered editing does. It lets you be able to edit on top without destroying the clips that are underneath it. Okay, so we went over all our buttons and transparency and went through all those modes and all the functions of those. So hopefully we're feeling a lot better on that front. We're going to talk about a few more like hotkey commands that are here in Pro Tools that you can use. And actually, this may be something too that may help you, since we were talking about playback and some of the zoom before we go into these modes, I'll show you that. Like you can go into, where is this? Options, edit, there it is. I knew it was under one of these. So it's like if you wanted the window to scroll with you, this is where you can make, windows scroll. Like if you want it to be like continuous, like one of these where it, where it's moving the whole time, like while you're watching it go, you can select those options. If you want it to just keep the playhead centered the whole time, then the session just moves with it, which would be like if you're in the middle of a session and then it just, keeps moving as it goes across the session. So those are those fronts. And then let me go back to other views. No scrolling, just puts it back at normal, obviously. And so that's just how you get those going. Like page view would be pretty self-explanatory. Let me zoom into that. So if it's like, if you're here, this is what a page would be. So like, let me zoom in a little farther so it goes faster. So like, as it gets into the page, just gonna jump to the next page and just show you groups like that. So this is how you can make Pro Tools move if that's how you want it. Like I know some other people like to see their stuff move like that, but this is how this is how it will move around there. If you did decide you wanted to have scrolling. So wanted y'all to know about that. Okay, now let's get back to the other hotkeys that I was gonna do for the last part here, and then we'll talk about nudging, and then a couple of cool little audio suite tools that you can use in your sessions if you need to do something that's kind of crazy or do some kind of fun creative stuff. So we talked about how there was basic numbers for all of these, how we had 1 and 2 to move everything around, 3 records, 4 is loop, like what loops our play up there, 5's loop records, 6 is punch, 7 turns the metronome on, 8 turns the count off on, and 9 does our MIDI merge, which we talked about in the MIDI class. So, but there's also connected ones to these where you hold command. So like if I hold command 1, it opens our big transport, just like this if you didn't want this or you wanted to have a floating transport around. Command 2 shows us all our session, how our session was set up. Cool, I see my session's 44.1 and 24-bit, and it was interleaved. So this is where we can see all that information is command 2. Command 3 is our big counter. If you ever need to see a measure or show a band something big to show a measure, you can also change this to minutes and seconds if you want it to be, if you're like doing editing and tell me like this is used like if you're doing a session with like a band where the whole band's playing together and they're not on a grid and they want to listen through to their own parts, and you play back the song with them in the control room and they write down any errors or punch spots they think they need, and they can just tell you the time or the measure and you can do it that way. Now here when you do command 4, this is our automation controls. Pro Tools HD is up here at the studio, so most of us at home, me included, I just have standard Pro Tools, so we're only gonna see the write enable options up here, these ones right here, and then suspend. And what suspend does is it just turns off all automation. You see that it actually puts a blue line there. Otherwise it works. And then what this is for is just write mode only. Like if you were using one of these, like using like an artist mix like we have here in the studio, or any kind of fader, like a fader port or anything that lets you draw automation from a fader, which is a lot easier to control, or you can draw by hand too. But when you do write and you put write mode on here for this, when you press play, you're gonna see that it plays the song, and then you can start moving this to where it draws in what that automation is. Now, if you don't want it to work, like you can, if I press volume here in write mode and we try to write on it and you press this, it won't let you write. So it's like, just lets you control automation. If you want to write, you need all these things on. And if you didn't want it to be able to write over anything that you've already done, you can uncheck it and it's impossible to overwrite over the automation. So that's command 4, that's your automation window. Command 5 is our memory locations, which I've probably talked to some of y'all about. I am huge on memory locations. Let me show you how these work. You can create a memory location by pressing enter on your number pad, and it just opens, and then you can press enter, draw it, makes a clip there. If you don't have a number pad and you can't hit the enter on the number pad, because return on his regular enter next to all the letters takes you back to the front of the session automatically, where this creates a marker like a marker point. But if you don't have that, you can set the cursor where you want it, and you can press the little plus here, and it'll let you make a new marker for clip 2. Now, so then once you open the window, Command 5, and you have this, you can just jump from clips very quickly in your session, and you can fly around very quick to those spots. Usually I use this to mark like intros, verse, pre-chorus, chorus, solo, all that kind of stuff, so I can jump around a song super fast. And even without this up, I'm gonna keep it up just so you can see what I'm doing, but there's a hotkey to jump to memory locations if you remember where they're at, which sometimes you might have them up. So here I only know I have 1 and 2. So you can press on your number pad, dot, the period, 1, like period, and the number that is to the left of the memory location, it'll go right to it. So if I do dot 1 dot, jumps right to it. Dot 2 dot, jumps right to it. And I can do that without even having the memory location window up. Like I can do dot 1 dot, dot 2 dot, and it just hops to whatever memory location I already have set. So that is that stuff. Command 6, there's nothing on Command 6. Command 7's Video Universe if you're working on videos. Command 8 is Beat Detective, which I showed y'all a whole seminar on Beat Detective, so you can go look at that if you want to learn more about Beat Detective. And then Command 9, I can't open it because we don't have a video in here, but if you have a video opened, like machine tracking arms Command 6, which is something I don't have either. Video here is, this is if you have a video track in Pro Tools. This just pops up another window that's just a screen of the video that you're watching. So that's what Command 9 does. That's all our command buttons there. Also on our number pad over here, if you press the equal sign on the number pad, it takes you right to the front of your cursor. So you can send the cursor wherever you want by just saying like, cool, if I want the cursor back to 1 or I need the cursor at 40, you know, it'll go to wherever you want the cursor by just pressing enter, like equals the number and where it goes. If you have a selection selected, like let's say we have a section here selected, right? And we wanted to drag it or add another section to it, or we had a clip grabbed and it's like, oh, I actually wanted to add another thing. You can, or I wanted to add a measure before that. Obviously you can either drag out, or if you press the division or / above the number pad, it goes straight to that start point. So like this clip, this region starting at 11 to 15, let's say, oh, I actually wanted it to be 9 to 15. Now I can press 9 and now it automatically drags out my starting point. So that's what all those sections, that's what those buttons do. The other two things we're gonna talk about on the number pad that you have there is plus and minus, which plus, this is really cool. And it's our nudge function, which is really nice. So like our nudge right now, we can set our nudge grid to whatever we want. Right now I have it set to quarter notes, just like my grid. So if I press plus while I have this selected, I'm gonna hide my automation so we don't see that. You're gonna see it's gonna move this clip. It's nudging it a quarter note every time I press plus or minus on whatever I have grabbed, because that's what I currently have my nudge set to. Like if I have it on 8th note, you'll see it'll only move an 8th note. You see how it's going just in between those notes now. So we can make that as fine as we want. What's really good for stuff like this that I really like to use nudge mode for, like let's say I had a vocal that was really close and it's not on the grid and I'm trying to line it up with something that's there. You can switch this mode to minutes and seconds, won't affect anything else in your session that's on grid mode. And now you can jump to super, super tiny, like finite movements. So like this is like 1/10 of a second we're moving at right now on that clip. I just zoomed in farther so we could really see what's going on. You can go all the way to 1/100th of a second there, which is moving really small, or we can go all the way down to the fractions of a millisecond, which is 1,000th of a second, so we're really zooming in tiny on that front. So you can nudge at the tiniest of movements here with that. And so that's really nifty if you have to line up vocals or get something really, really accurate. And so that's the nudge function down there. And that's with plus and minus. So that is that front. And lastly, we'll talk about these two things, like a few things in the audio suite, and then we will be done for tonight. I haven't seen any questions, so hopefully y'all are following along and understanding everything that we're doing here. So I just want to talk about a couple things in the audio suite. So let me chop this thing right here. I'm just going to cut this and get me a little smaller segment here cut off. And then I can heal this with Command H for the cut on the original one, so there's no more line there. Okay, so let's say we were looking at this segment right here. So let's say we want to do something kind of cool with that, and maybe we want to have that be reversed now. So we have a few different options we can go to in our audio suite. Like if you want to do a reverse cymbal swell or a reverse snare hit or something from what you already have, we can do that. We have a few different things. So first thing I want to show you is this is something I always use to check if I want to see what the highest peak is in any clip that someone gives me. You can go to gain and it'll bring up this little audio suite gain window, and what you can do is press analyze. And it's going to tell me what the highest clip is. So like, wow, this is literally, this is literally 0 dB. So like because this is a mastered sample. So like if I turn this down to like -3 and now I analyze it, showing me the clips are at a different setting there. So it just shows you what the highest clip in your selection is at that time. So that's one audio event for those to check gain. Another big one that's cool, I mean, this is invert, it's kind of weird, I don't know, I mean, what it does is it literally flips like let me zoom in where you can see, like it's gonna just turn this upside down. So it just, not gonna make a big difference on what we just did here. But if you needed to invert the audio for some reason, you can do that. Lastly, this is kind of more the cool thing that I like, because there's times you do want to definitely reverse stuff. Some of this other stuff is just plugins that show up in here, but these are other effects that are part of this. So if we go down to reverse right here, you can press reverse, and then if I do render, and now it reverses that. So if you wanted to have like some of these kind of reverse kind of feels like we were listening to with the scrubber, you can always use the reverse tool and it will allow you to reverse a clip or a cymbal hit or a splash or any of that kind of stuff to make a cool sweep to build into it. So over these 2 lessons this week, we were able to go over all of our Pro Tools functions and modes and buttons and how to operate around this DAW. Hopefully this helped you out a lot more, and now you can, this is what I was showing. Now we have a lot more in the session. You can see that this shows every track up here that's in your session, but hopefully this helps you guys be able to really get around your session now at this point and be able to really navigate and do anything and set Pro Tools to settings that you want to be able to do anything that you want in there at your control to make it more efficient and easier and quicker so you can be a master of Pro Tools. So thanks everyone for watching tonight. I hope you enjoyed the lesson. Y'all have a great rest of your night, week, and weekend, and we will see you all next time. Later.
Thanks everybody for watching. If you found this content useful, please like this video. It will tell YouTube to show it to others. If you are enrolled, please go to the Seminars tab on the my.trcoa website and take the quiz over tonight's lesson. And if you need to book one-on-one time with an instructor, text 512-231-0344. If you aren't enrolled, go to trcoa.edu to find out more information about what we do. Also, please post in the chat subjects you'd like to see for our upcoming live streams. And as always, subscribe to our channel, and we'll see you guys on the flip side. Bye, everybody.